Julian nodded, suddenly aware of their proximity, of the scent of paint and something floral in her hair. "What about you?" she asked. "Nexus could run without your daily involvement." "Why the 100-hour weeks?" The question struck uncomfortably close to truths he avoided. "Because empty houses echo," he answered quietly. Understanding filled her eyes, not pity, and Julian felt seen in a way that both terrified and exhilarated him. Later, as they stood in the rain waiting for her bus, Julian impulsively offered his jacket. She declined with a smile, tilting her face to the downpour instead. "Rain is just water," she said. "We're not so fragile." Watching her embrace the storm rather than hide from it, Julian realized he'd spent years building shelters against emotions that Zara welcomed freely. As her bus appeared, she surprised him with a quick hug. "Same time next week?" she asked. Julian nodded, knowing he would rearrange board meetings and cancel flights if necessary, just to experience more of whatever this unfamiliar feeling was, this warmth spreading through his carefully constructed coldness. The call came at midnight. Water pipes had burst at the community center, flooding the newly renovated space. Julian arrived to find Zara directing volunteers, her clothes soaked as she moved books to higher shelves. "You didn't need to come," she said when she spotted him, but relief softened her exhausted features. "Yes, I did." Julian rolled up his sleeves and waded into the crisis. Hours later, when emergency plumbers had stemmed the worst and industrial fans hummed in the background, they found themselves alone in the small kitchen. Zara made tea with hands that trembled slightly from fatigue and cold. "The insurance won't cover all this," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "We were already operating on margins too thin to see." Julian moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Let me help," she tensed. "We don't need charity, Julian." "Not charity," he corrected, turning her to face him. "Investment in what matters." Their eyes locked, the small space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Months of gradually dissolving boundaries had led to this moment. Zara's defenses lowered by exhaustion, Julian's by her presence in his life. "Why?" she whispered. "Why does this place matter to you now?" Julian's thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of dirt. "Because you're here," he admitted. "Because you've shown me what I've been missing." The kiss, when it finally happened, felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. Zara's lips were soft against his, hesitant at first, then yielding with quiet hunger. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as her hands moved to his chest. Then his face. When they separated, breath mingling in the small space between them, Julian pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed. "Caring this much, it's foreign territory." Zara's smile held understanding beyond words. "No one does, really. We just try." That night they salvaged what they could from the center, working side by side until dawn painted the windows. In the quiet hours, Julian shared stories he'd told no one, about his father's coldness, the loneliness of success, his fear that wealth had hollowed rather than fulfilled him. Zara listened without judgment, occasionally touching his arm or hand, each contact a small bridge across the chasm of his isolation. When morning fully arrived, they sat exhausted on the center's front steps, watching the neighborhood awaken. Julian realized he'd never truly seen a sunrise from the streets, rather than from his penthouse view. "Stay with me tonight," Zara said suddenly, then blushed. "I mean, just to rest. My apartment is small but dry." Julian nodded, knowing they had crossed a threshold. That evening, in her tiny walk-up with mismatched furniture and walls covered in photos of smiling faces from around the world, Julian felt more at peace than in his minimalist mansion. As they fell asleep on her narrow bed, fully clothed and utterly spent, Julian curved his body around hers protectively, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Julian woke to unfamiliar sounds, street vendors calling, children laughing, life happening without filters or barriers. Zara's side of the bed was empty, but a note on the pillow directed him to the roof. He found her there, practicing yoga in the morning light, her movements fluid and centered. Without opening her eyes, she sensed his presence. "Join me," she invited. Julian, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, felt suddenly awkward. "I've never done yoga." "Perfect time to start," she replied, making space on her mat. Following her guidance, Julian attempted poses that revealed how disconnected he'd become from his own body. When he stumbled, Zara's hand steadied him, her touch igniting sensations that had nothing to do with exercise. Afterward, sharing fruit and coffee on her small balcony, Julian studied her profile against the morning sky. "You've changed me," he said simply. Zara turned to him, her expression serious. "No, Julian. You've allowed yourself to change. There's a difference." That evening, after spending the day helping restore the community center, they returned to her apartment. The air between them had shifted, charged with awareness and anticipation. As Zara stepped from the shower, wrapped in a faded towel, Julian felt his breath catch. She approached slowly, droplets glistening on her shoulders, and took his hand. "I'm not perfect," she whispered. "I have scars, too." She guided his fingers to her side, where burn marks from the childhood fire mapped her skin. Julian bent to kiss them gently, reverently, his lips traveling the landscape of her past pain. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. Their coming together was unhurried, a gradual exploration of trust and vulnerability. Julian, who had known physical intimacy without emotional connection, found himself overwhelmed by the difference. Every touch, every kiss was communication, a language beyond words. Later, tangled in sheets and moonlight, Zara traced patterns on his chest. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she whispered. Julian considered, then spoke the truth he'd hidden even from himself. "I've been afraid my entire adult life, of needing someone, of being insufficient." Zara rose on one elbow, her face serious in the half-light. "Everyone is insufficient alone, Julian. That's not weakness, it's human." She shared her own fears then, of failing those who depended on her, of the center closing, of loving too deeply in a world where loss was inevitable. As she spoke, Julian realized what he needed to do, not just for her but for himself, for the man he wanted to become. In the gentle hours before dawn, they made love again, this time with the intensity of newfound purpose. Julian surrendered completely to the connection between them, letting go of control and finding, paradoxically, a strength he'd never known. Zara Malik adjusted her simple emerald dress in the reflection of the skyscraper's glass door. The charity gala felt like entering another dimension, one where a month's salary for the families she worked with wouldn't cover the cost of a single table centerpiece. Yet she was here with purpose, to secure funding for her community center in the struggling Riverdale district. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over Silicon Valley's elite. Zara's practiced smile hid her discomfort as she navigated conversations, gently steering topics toward community investment rather than tax benefits. "You don't belong here either, do you?" The voice behind her was deep, tinged with something between amusement and contempt. Turning, Zara found herself facing Julian Blackwood, founder of Nexus Technologies and tonight's reluctant host. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the tension in his shoulders or the shadows beneath his piercing gray eyes. "I go where I'm needed, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, extending her hand. "Zara Malik, Riverdale Community Initiative." "Ah, the miracle worker I've heard about." His handshake was brief, businesslike. "Though miracles require divine intervention, what you need is capital. What we need is humanity," she countered. "Capital without compassion builds empty structures, not communities." Something flickered in Julian's expression, surprise, perhaps, at her candor. Before he could respond, his assistant appeared, whisking him away to greet investors. Julian cast a final glance at Zara, who raised her champagne glass in a small salute. Later, as donors pledged amounts that made her dizzy, Zara approached the microphone when invited to speak about her work. She spoke not of statistics or projections, but of Mia, the 8-year-old who taught herself to read while caring for her siblings, and Omar, the veteran who built a community garden where concrete once cracked. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Julian watching intently, his customary scowl softened into something more complex. After her speech, applause filled the room, but it was Julian's silent nod that somehow mattered most. When the evening ended with promises of support, Zara slipped away early, trading heels for worn flats before catching the last train home. The next morning, while sorting through donations at the center, Zara looked up to find Julian standing awkwardly in the doorway. Without entourage or pretense, "Your speech," he began, hands thrust into the pockets of pants too expensive for the neighborhood. "It wasn't what I expected. Is that good or bad? She asked, brushing dust from her hands. It was... He paused, searching for words. Authentic. Rare quality these days. Zara smiled. Coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot. Julian hesitated before nodding. Why not? As she poured 2 cups in chipped mugs, neither realized this moment would alter the trajectory of both their lives. Zara, who gave love freely to a world that often took without returning. And Julian, who had everything except what mattered most, connection. When their fingers brushed during the exchange, something electric and undeniable passed between them. For the first time in years, Julian felt a wall within him tremble. 3 weeks after the gala, Julian found himself doing something unprecedented, volunteering on a Saturday morning. The community center's walls needed painting, and despite his assistant's horrified protests, he arrived in jeans and a plain t-shirt. You actually came, Zara said, surprise evident in her warm brown eyes. She wore paint-splattered overalls, her dark hair tied back with a colorful scarf. I said I would. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Though I should warn you, I've never painted anything except metaphorical targets on competitors. Her laugh was genuine, musical. First time for everything. Here. She handed him a roller, their fingers connecting longer than necessary. The sensation lingered as he watched her demonstrate the proper technique. Her movements efficient and graceful. Throughout the morning, Julian found himself studying Zara when she wasn't looking. The way she knelt to help a child add handprints to the wall's border. How she remembered everyone's names and stories. Her patience with an elderly volunteer who repeated the same anecdote 3 times. You're different here, Julian observed during their lunch break, sharing sandwiches on the center's back steps. Different from what? Zara asked, wiping mustard from the corner of her mouth. From the woman at the gala. More. He gestured vaguely, searching for the right word. Real? She smiled. We all wear masks, Julian. Even you. Especially me, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. When rain began unexpectedly, volunteers scattered inside. Julian found himself alone with Zara in the supply closet, organizing materials in the narrow space. Why this work? He asked. You're smart, educated. You could be anywhere. Zara considered him thoughtfully. When I was 12, my family lost everything in a fire. Strangers helped us, people who had little themselves but gave anyway. She reached past him for a container, her arm brushing his chest. That changes how you see the world. 6 months later, the Riverdale Community Initiative had become the Malik Blackwood Foundation, with centers opening in 4 underserved neighborhoods. Julian had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Nexus, appointing a CEO who shared his evolved vision of corporate responsibility. Today they were celebrating the grand reopening of the original center, expanded and renovated beyond Zara's wildest dreams. You're staring again, she teased, finding Julian watching her from across the room as she arranged flowers donated by a local garden club. Can't help it, he replied, crossing to help her. You're incandescent when you're happy. The changes in him were evident to everyone. The softened edges, the genuine smile, the patience with which he now listened to others. His board of directors had been shocked when he announced a major shift in Nexus's priorities, dedicating substantial resources to community development rather than merely extracting talent. The investors will adjust, he'd told Zara when she worried about the fallout, and those who don't can find another playground for their money. Now, as community members filled the new space, seniors attending computer classes, children in the expanded library, young entrepreneurs in the business incubator, Julian felt a fulfillment that no financial success had ever provided. Zara found him later on the rooftop garden, tending to the vegetables they'd planted together. Who would have thought, she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind, that Julian Blackwood would know the difference between cilantro and parsley? He turned in her embrace, kissing her lightly. I had an excellent teacher. The ring box in his pocket felt both terrifying and right. He'd chosen not a diamond but a sapphire, the color of the night sky they'd watched together on their first official date. Zara, he began, suddenly nervous despite months of planning this moment. Before you, I had everything except what matters. I built walls instead of bridges, accumulated instead of contributed. Her eyes widened as he took her hands in his. You had nothing to give but love, he continued, voice steady despite his racing heart, and it changed my world forever. Now I want to build a life that reflects what you've taught me, that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we give." As he knelt and presented the ring, Julian realized how completely love had transformed him. The man who once measured worth in market share now found it in Zara's tears of joy, in the community they'd built together, in the future stretching before them, uncertain but faced together. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her embrace. Later, as twilight painted the sky in hues of promise, they stood together overlooking the neighborhood that had become home. Julian's arm circled Zara's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "What next?" she asked, her voice content with the present yet curious about their future. Julian smiled, thinking of the international expansion plans for the foundation, of the sustainable housing initiative they'd begun developing, of the child they hoped to welcome in the coming years. "Everything," he answered simply. "Together." In the gathering darkness, lights from homes and street lamps created constellations of human connection. Julian, who once viewed such scenes with detachment, now recognized them for what they were: stars in the darkness, guiding travelers home. Like Zara had guided him, with nothing but love to give.